So frog gets a bad rap for a lot of different reasons, and what I want to do today is I want to break down all of the different things you can do to a frog and that you can do with your frog fishing setup to miss less fish on a frog. And if you're a guy that swings the bat too early when those fish eat that frog, at the end of this video I will have a special tip just for you that I figured out last year, because a topwater is something that you do not want to miss out on because it's going to start playing big time right now. So stick around, you guys are not going to want to miss this. So for this video, I will be using a 6 Sense Vega frog, but this applies to every single frog across the market. This just happened to be the one that I was playing with today. And so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to break down the things that I do to a frog, the easiest things that I can do to it, to increase my hookup ratio, and then I will kind of get into the things that become a little bit more time consuming and the things that you have to do to your setup, and then a special tip at the end like I talked about. So I'm going to turn the camera around and I'm going to show you all of the different things that you can do to modify a frog to help get more action out of it and catch more fish on a frog. So for this part of the video, all you're going to need is a pair of rusty old pliers, because that's all I had on hand. So your typical frog, as it comes straight out of the package, is barely able to get a hook in it, right? If we grab another one, this is brand new out of the package, you can see those hooks come extremely flush, right? And that's not a bad thing, because if you're fishing around really thick vegetation or you're fishing around something that has a lot of cover, that's going to prevent you from getting a frog hung up. But what that's also going to do is that's going to prevent the hooks going into the roof of the fish's mouth. So the first thing that I will do to a frog if I'm fishing and I'm missing fish on a frog is I will take and I will bend these hooks out and I will bend them up slightly. So to bend them out, when you look at this frog, you can see that the hooks go flush to the sides of the body, and that's how most frogs come. You can see those hook points come just perfect to the side of the body. All you have to do is grab a hold of those hooks and push, and you'll see you'll start to get a little bit more wiggle room the more you bend it, and all of a sudden right there you can see now I have a lot more wiggle room. And what that's doing is that's just getting a little separation from the body of that frog, and so that's giving your hooks a little bit more hookup ratio right there. But then what you also can do is take a pair of pliers and bend each one of these up just a smidgen. So all I'm going to do is bend them up just a little bit. And all you're trying to do is give that just a little bit more angle to be able to penetrate when you set the hook on those fish. Because if you think about it, when you set the hook, a lot of times when it comes flush, you're just not going to get a good hookup penetration. And so all I'm going to do is, again, just take just like that. And now you can see that one is actually angled up, and you can see almost every time I brush on it, this one I don't get anything, this one it's starting to catch. So you can do that with each of those, just like that. Again, just take a pair of pliers, tweak it up just a little bit, and then you're going to get a better hookup ratio because that hook is going to be sticking up just a little bit more. So that's the first thing that I'm going to do with the frog. Now, the only place that this is going to be hurting you is if you're fishing in lily pads, your frog is going to tend to get caught a little bit more. But luckily, you'll be fishing Cortland Silent Flip 65-pound braid, which is a flat 16 carrier braid, which will allow you to pull it pretty much out of anything. And that's the beautiful thing about a frog, is you can throw it on extremely heavy gear. But that is the first thing that I will do to a frog, is take and bend those hooks out and up. So that is the easiest thing that you can do to a frog to increase your hookup ratio. The next thing you can do is actually boil a frog in hot water. And it sounds a lot more complicated than it is. To do that, all you need is a small pot, a stove, put about 1.5 inches, 2 inches of water in there, get it to where it's boiling, and drop your frogs in there with a pair of tongs, swirl them around for about 20-30 seconds, depending on the different frogs you have. The stiffer it is, the more you want to leave it in the water. The softer it is, the less you want to leave it in the water. And what that's going to do is that is going to soften up your plastic to allow it to collapse easier. Because a lot of frogs right out of the package, the durometer, or the thickness and the stiffness of your frog, is a little bit too stiff. And so when it collapses, it doesn't like to collapse really fast. And that can also be what's hindering you from catching fish. And also, the 6 Sense Vega has a little hole right in the top right here. If your hole where your air squeezes out of is plugged, it also won't let your frog collapse. So you might want to open that hole up a little bit on the top to be able to let that frog squish, so that way you're getting the most hook penetration into the roof of that fish's mouth. So that's all the tips on how to modify a frog. The next tips that I want to talk about are how you modify your setup, and one last tip that I will talk about at the end, I promise. But if you miss fish on a frog because you set the hook too early, what I like to do is I will go to a longer rod. I will go to, instead of fishing a 7-foot medium heavy or a 7-foot heavy, I will go to a 7.6 or a 7.11, because that's fail-safing you as an individual when you're fishing a frog. So when you're working a frog, when you set the hook, the shorter the rod, the faster your reaction time. But the longer your rod, the slower your reaction time. So that's actually going to give you a few milliseconds extra to allow those fish to turn with it. So that way you're going to get the hook in their mouth instead of pulling it away from them. Now, one last thing I do want to talk about is if you are a guy that you've tried everything and you simply pull the frog out of the fish's mouth every time, what I want you to do is when you're frog fishing, I want you to put headphones in. I want you to listen to music. Because your reaction time is based off of the sound and not the sight. Your reaction is faster when you listen to it as opposed to when you see it. Because when you hear it, as soon as it hits your eardrums, you're setting the hook. But if you see it and then have to set the hook, you actually give yourself a little bit more time to set the hook, because it almost makes you second guess what you see, because you have to visually understand that that fish has actually eaten your frog, as opposed to hearing that massive blow up when those fish hit that frog. I'm telling you, this was a problem of mine for a really long time, and I switched up to listening to music when I was frog fishing, and it completely changed my hookup ratio. I was getting every frog fish as opposed to like 1 out of every 3 compared to how I was before, just by listening to music and taking my ears out of the situation. So that is my tips for fishing a frog. I will have my favorite frog fishing gear linked down below, as well as some of my favorite frogs that I really, really enjoy. But if you guys like today's video and you want to see more content like this, hit that subscribe button to follow along. But God bless every single one of you guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.